The town of Oak Hill, Pennsylvania was a quiet place known for its beauty throughout the 4 seasons. In Elizabeth Clark's garden, roses were blooming in the early summer sunlight. Elizabeth smiled peacefully as she tended to her garden. Her fingertips possessed the sure skill cultivated during 40 years as a nurse, and the plants flourished under her care. "Grandma! Look!" An energetic voice called from the backyard, and Elizabeth looked up. Her 7-year-old granddaughter Emma was running toward her, clutching something in both hands. When she opened her small hands, a large ladybug appeared. "My, what a beautiful creature," Elizabeth said gently. "But she might have a family somewhere. Thank you for showing me. Now, let's return her to where she belongs." Emma looked a bit disappointed but nodded and released the insect back into the field. Elizabeth stroked her granddaughter's golden hair, feeling proud of how thoughtful the child had become. Emma had inherited both her mother Caroline's intelligence and Elizabeth's own kindness. "When is Mom coming home?" Emma asked. Her blue eyes reflected her longing for her mother. "Soon, dear. She had an important court case today. Mom works to protect vulnerable people from those who would harm them." Caroline was a lawyer working at a local law firm. She devoted herself passionately to advocating for victims of domestic violence and workers who had been treated unfairly. Elizabeth was deeply proud of her only daughter's fight for people in difficult situations. At the same time, she understood the challenges Caroline faced as a single mother balancing work and raising a child. 3 years after her divorce from Robert, Caroline had been working diligently. Her ex-husband had been a capable doctor, but their relationship had been complex and difficult. After the divorce, Robert had moved to a hospital in another state, and though he had visitation rights with Emma, he actually only saw her a few times a year. "Shall we bake cookies? We can surprise Mom when she gets home," Elizabeth suggested. Emma's face brightened. "Chocolate chip ones? Of course. They're your favorite, aren't they?" The two headed to the kitchen and gathered around the old wooden table to begin baking. For Elizabeth, this time was precious above all else. Since retiring, her days had been filled with reading, gardening, and most importantly, time with her granddaughter. Emma often spent weekday afternoons at Elizabeth's house after school, where they would work on homework together, learn about nature, or sometimes simply sit side by side reading books. Around the time the sweet aroma of cookies began wafting from the oven, they heard the front door open. "I'm home," Caroline's tired voice echoed down the hallway. Emma wiped her flour-whitened hands on her apron and rushed to her mother. "Mom! We baked cookies." Caroline, still in her suit, embraced her daughter and gently kissed the top of her head. "That smells wonderful. How was your day?" Elizabeth watched her daughter and granddaughter from a short distance. Dark circles were clearly visible under Caroline's eyes, and her shoulders drooped slightly, perhaps from tension. However, her expression was soft and full of affection when speaking with Emma. "You look tired," Elizabeth offered Caroline a cup of warm tea while Emma was telling her about a textbook. "Thank you, Mom." Caroline showed a grateful smile but quickly returned to a serious expression. "Today's trial was difficult. But I think we'll win." Elizabeth simply nodded. She didn't ask for details about her daughter's work. She understood well the need for confidentiality. Instead, she said, "There's a town festival this weekend. We promised to go together, the 3 of us, remember?" "Of course I remember," Caroline answered in a slightly brighter voice. "Emma has been looking forward to it for a week now. I'm so excited," Emma exclaimed while putting a cookie in her mouth. "There'll be cotton candy and a Ferris wheel and games too, right?" "All of that," Elizabeth laughed. "And there's going to be a quilt exhibition. My work will be displayed too." That evening, the 3 shared dinner together. Caroline set aside the fatigue from work for a while and enjoyed conversation with her daughter and mother. Elizabeth felt the strength of their family bond. It was something special that had been nurtured through overcoming difficulties. After dinner, Caroline took Emma home. Elizabeth stood at the front door and watched them get into the car. Monday afternoon, Elizabeth went out to the garden to water the tulip bulbs she had recently planted. The hint of autumn had begun to drift in the air, and it was the season to prepare for winter. While absorbed in this quiet work, she heard the phone ringing from inside the house. "Hello, this is Elizabeth Clark," she answered after wiping the soil from her hands. "Mrs. Clark, I'm calling from the emergency department at St. Joseph's Hospital," a young woman's voice responded. "Your daughter, Caroline Clark, has been in a car accident. She's currently being treated in the emergency room." The receiver nearly slipped from Elizabeth's hand. She quickly tightened her grip and asked in a trembling voice, "How is she? Is it serious?" "The attending physician will explain the details when you arrive. Please come as soon as possible." From her years of experience as a nurse, Elizabeth understood well why hospital staff were reluctant to give details over the phone. It usually meant the situation was serious. She tried to think calmly while suppressing her emotions. "I understand. I'll come right away." After hanging up, Elizabeth looked at the clock. 3:30 in the afternoon. It was when Emma's school day ended. If Caroline had been in an accident, someone needed to pick up Emma. She quickly grabbed her keys and wallet and jumped in her car. When she arrived at the elementary school, many children had already gone home. Emma was sitting on a bench in front of the school building, looking around anxiously. It was clear she was worried that her mother hadn't come to pick her up. As soon as Elizabeth got out of the car, Emma noticed her and showed an expression of relief. "Grandma. Why isn't Mom here?" Elizabeth approached her granddaughter and placed a hand on her small shoulder. "Emma, I need to tell you something," she chose her words carefully. "Mom was in a car accident on her way home. She's in the hospital now." Emma's blue eyes widened. "Is Mom okay? Is she going to die?" Her voice trembled. "No, she's not going to die," Elizabeth said, though she wasn't sure of this herself. But she needed to reassure her granddaughter. "But right now, doctors are looking after her. Let's go see her." Emma held Elizabeth's hand firmly and nodded quietly. She was remarkably brave for a 7-year-old. As Elizabeth headed to the car, she was a bit surprised by her granddaughter's maturity. At the same time, she felt a tightness in her chest, worrying about how serious Caroline's condition might be. In the car, Emma silently stared out the window. Elizabeth glanced at her granddaughter occasionally as she drove. "Mom will be fine," she said. "Mom is a strong person." Emma just nodded. Her small fists were tightly clenched on her knees. After parking in the St. Joseph's Hospital lot, Elizabeth took Emma's hand and hurried to the emergency entrance. After giving her name at the reception, a nurse guided them to a waiting room. "Mrs. Clark, Dr. Morris will be with you shortly to speak with you," the nurse said before leaving. After waiting about 10 minutes, a middle-aged male doctor in a white coat approached them. "Are you Elizabeth Clark? Caroline Clark's family?" Elizabeth nodded and indicated Emma. "I'm her mother. This is her daughter, Emma." "I'm Dr. Morris," he introduced himself, then his expression darkened slightly. "Let me tell you about your daughter's condition. Caroline was in a head-on collision with a car that suddenly changed lanes from the oncoming traffic." Elizabeth gasped. "And her condition?" "She has sustained serious head injuries and is currently unconscious. She also has multiple rib fractures and internal injuries," Dr. Morris continued quietly. "We've already performed emergency surgery, and the bleeding has stopped. She's now receiving intensive care in the ICU." Emma let out a small cry. Elizabeth embraced her granddaughter while asking further, "Is there any danger to her life?" "She's stable at the moment. The next 48 hours will be critical," Dr. Morris looked at Emma and softened his voice. She's young and healthy, so I believe her prospects for recovery are good. Can we see her? Of course. However, visiting hours in the ICU are limited. The little one will need to wear a mask, Dr. Morris said, looking at Emma. Elizabeth exhaled deeply. Thank you. What about the details of the accident? The other driver. According to the police, the other vehicle was a black sedan that fled the scene after the collision. I understand the police are currently reviewing security camera footage. Guided by Dr. Morris, Elizabeth and Emma took the elevator to the floor where the ICU was located. Before entering Caroline's room, Elizabeth firmly grasped Emma's shoulders and looked into her eyes. Emma, when we go in, Mom will be connected to a lot of machines. It might look scary, but those machines are important to help Mom. Do you understand? Emma nodded with a serious expression. Is Mom awake? She's sleeping right now. But I think she'll know we're there with her. When they entered the ICU room, they saw Caroline. She was connected to multiple IVs and monitoring devices, had abrasions on her face, and her head was wrapped in bandages. Only the regular sound of the ventilator echoed in the quiet room. At first, Emma stopped, seemingly frightened by the sight of her mother. But soon she gathered her courage, approached, and took Caroline's hand. Mom, it's me, Emma. Grandma is here too. Elizabeth, holding back tears, observed her daughter's condition with a professional eye. The monitor readings were stable, but Caroline's complexion was pale, and she looked extremely fragile. Your daughter is very strong, a nurse who had entered the room said. Her vital signs are stable. Thank you, Elizabeth replied. I'm a former nurse. I understand the situation. The nurse nodded and smiled at Emma. Talk to your mom a lot. She might be able to hear you. After leaving the room, Elizabeth and Emma sat on a bench in the ICU hallway. Suddenly, a police officer in uniform approached them. Mrs. Clark. I'm Detective Johnson. I'd like to ask you a few questions about Caroline Clark's accident. Elizabeth nodded and said, while gently stroking Emma's head, I'll help in any way I can. Based on our investigation so far, it appears that a black sedan from the oncoming lane crossed the center line and collided with your daughter's car, the police officer explained, looking at his notebook. According to witness testimony, that car seems to have deliberately changed lanes. We're currently reviewing security camera footage from the area. Deliberately? Elizabeth asked in surprise. Does that mean it wasn't an accident, but intentional? The police officer chose his words carefully. We're investigating that possibility, among others. Do you know of anyone who might have been hostile toward your daughter? Elizabeth shook her head. I can't think of anyone. She's a lawyer, so she might have enemies from work, but... She paused, thinking for a moment, then suddenly said as if remembering, what about her ex-husband, Robert? They divorced 3 years ago. Their relationship wasn't good, but... We'll investigate all possibilities, the police officer said. If you remember anything else, please contact us anytime. After the police officer left, Elizabeth looked at her granddaughter. There were traces of tears on Emma's cheeks, but she was quietly maintaining her strength. Elizabeth thought with a prayer-like feeling, Caroline, hang in there. We're here with you. On the third day after Caroline's accident, Elizabeth headed to the hospital early in the morning with Emma. The previous day, Dr. Morris had called to say, her vital signs are becoming more stable, which allowed them to hold on to a small hope. Grandma, will Mom wake up today? Emma asked from the back seat of the car. Elizabeth looked at her granddaughter through the rearview mirror. Emma's eyes held mixed emotions of anxiety and hope. I don't know, Emma. But she's getting better little by little. Upon arriving at the hospital and taking the elevator to the ICU floor, Elizabeth looked for Caroline's attending physician. At the entrance to the ICU, a different nurse from yesterday greeted them. "Good morning, Mrs. Clark," the young female nurse smiled. "Dr. Morris is in surgery this morning, but there's been no change in Caroline's condition. She remains stable." "Thank you," Elizabeth expressed her gratitude and headed toward Caroline's room. Upon entering the room, the same scene as yesterday spread before them. Caroline had her eyes closed and was connected to a ventilator and various devices. However, her complexion seemed a little better. From her experience as a nurse, Elizabeth knew this was a sign of recovery. Emma bravely approached her mother's bed and held Caroline's hand with her small hands. "Good morning, Mom. We're here again today," she spoke quietly. Elizabeth kissed her daughter's forehead gently and checked the monitor values. All were within normal range. She sat down and opened a book she had brought. "Emma, shall we read to Mom? I'm sure she can hear us." Emma nodded, and Elizabeth began reading poetry from her daughter's favorite collection in a soft voice. Only the beeping of the monitors and her quiet recitation echoed in the room. About an hour later, Emma suddenly stood up. "Grandma, I want some water." "Yes," Elizabeth closed the book. "I'll go buy some from the vending machine in the hallway." "Wait here." "No, I'll go with you," Emma said. "It's sad to leave Mom alone." Elizabeth smiled. "Mom is sleeping. We'll be right back." However, Emma shook her head stubbornly. At times like this, she showed her mother's inherited stubbornness. Elizabeth gave in and took her granddaughter's hand, leaving the room. They purchased 2 bottles of water from the vending machine in the hallway and returned to Caroline's room. A little while after they returned to the room, Emma seemed to have found something by Caroline's bed and was observing it intently. "What is it, Emma?" Elizabeth asked. Emma suddenly tugged at Elizabeth's sleeve. Her expression was a mixture of confusion and fear. "Grandma," she said in a small voice, "this isn't an accident. Look at Mom's side." Elizabeth looked in the direction Emma was pointing. Caroline's hospital gown had ridden up, exposing part of her side. There was a small dot visible, like an injection mark. The position was unnatural for a medical procedure. Elizabeth approached and observed more carefully. Her nursing intuition was sending a warning. "Emma, step back a bit," Elizabeth said quietly. She pulled Caroline's hospital gown further back to check her entire side. There were multiple injection marks. These were clearly in positions that would not be considered during normal medical procedures. They were traces of someone intentionally injecting drugs. Elizabeth froze. Various possibilities raced through her mind. Someone was trying to harm Caroline. Perhaps the accident wasn't a coincidence either. "I'm going to press the nurse call button." Elizabeth pushed the button with a trembling hand. A few seconds later, the young nurse appeared. "Is everything all right? Do you know anything about these injection marks?" Elizabeth asked, trying to appear calm. The nurse approached with a confused expression and looked at Caroline's side. "These are not from regular procedures. I'll check on this." As soon as she left the room, Elizabeth turned to Emma. "Emma, did you see anything? Did you see any strange person coming into Mom's room?" Emma thought for a moment and hesitantly answered, "I saw, yesterday, when you were in the bathroom. A man in white clothes came into Mom's room." Elizabeth's heart began to race. "Like a doctor?" "Yes, but different," Emma said. "Not the usual doctor. Someone I've never seen before. And..." She lowered her voice. "He was kind of scary." Dr. Morris and the head nurse rushed into the room. Elizabeth showed them the injection marks and explained the situation. "These are not from medical procedures," Dr. Morris said with a grave expression. "We'll conduct blood tests immediately. Head nurse, please call security." The next hour passed in confusion. Security staff were called, and nurses took emergency blood samples. Elizabeth spoke with Dr. Morris in the hallway. The blood tests detected drugs that were not prescribed, Dr. Morris said quietly, but with an angry voice. It appears someone was intentionally trying to administer drugs to Caroline. Elizabeth exhaled deeply. We need to contact the police. The hospital has already done so, Dr. Morris said. They should arrive shortly. Elizabeth looked toward Emma. Her granddaughter was waiting in the playroom, accompanied by a nurse. She turned back to Dr. Morris with a determined expression and said, I'm going directly to the police station. I want them to check the hospital surveillance cameras too. Of course, Dr. Morris nodded. Your daughter's safety is our top priority. We'll provide 24-hour security. Elizabeth hurried to her granddaughter. Emma, Grandma needs to go to the police station. It's to protect Mom. Emma nodded with a serious expression. I want to go too. I want to help Mom. You stay in the hospital playroom, Elizabeth said. The nurse will stay with you. I'll be back soon. Emma initially resisted but eventually agreed. Elizabeth kissed her granddaughter and rushed out of the hospital. Upon arriving at the police station, Elizabeth was guided to Detective Jennifer Reed. She was a female officer in her early 40s with a calm demeanor. Mrs. Clark, please tell me what happened. Detective Reed guided Elizabeth to an interview room. Elizabeth explained in detail about the discovered injection marks, the man in white that Emma had seen, and the results of the blood tests. Detective Reed listened carefully and took notes. We received a call from the hospital and have already begun an investigation, Detective Reed said. We're reviewing the hospital surveillance camera footage. Could you give me a detailed description of the person your granddaughter saw? Elizabeth conveyed the information from Emma as thoroughly as possible. I'd also like you to investigate my ex-husband, Robert Fisher, she added. He's a doctor and divorced Caroline 3 years ago. Their relationship was never good. Detective Reed nodded. We'll investigate all possibilities. The surveillance camera footage is now ready, so let's take a look. She opened a laptop and played footage showing the hospital corridor. The date and time stamp indicated yesterday. Elizabeth concentrated on watching the footage around the time when Emma would have been in the bathroom. And there it was. The image of a man in a white coat entering Caroline's room. The face was only visible for a moment, but Elizabeth's chest tightened. Stop there, please, she gasped. That man, it's my ex-husband, Robert. Detective Reed stopped the footage and enlarged it. Are you certain? There's no mistake, Elizabeth's voice trembled. But he's not a doctor at this hospital, is he? He should be working at a hospital in another state. We'll confirm that. Detective Reed picked up the phone and gave instructions. Then she turned back to Elizabeth. Mrs. Clark, we're also progressing with the investigation into your daughter's accident. We've made progress in identifying the hit-and-run vehicle. We're also checking if there's a connection between the owner of that car and the person we just identified. All the pieces suddenly fell into place in Elizabeth's mind. Could both the accident and the suspicious injections have been planned by Robert? But why? Does he have a motive? Detective Reed asked. Any reason to harm Caroline? Elizabeth thought deeply. 3 years since the divorce. Robert had visitation rights with Emma but rarely came to see her. Did he resent Caroline? Or Emma, Elizabeth suddenly said. He might have wanted custody of Emma. There was a custody battle during the divorce. Caroline won full custody, but Detective Reed nodded with a serious expression. We'll conduct a detailed investigation. Mrs. Clark, will also ensure the safety of you and your granddaughter. We'll station officers at the hospital. The next day, things rapidly developed. As Elizabeth was visiting Caroline in her hospital room that morning, Detective Reed arrived. Her expression showed the tension of an important development. "Mrs. Clark, I have something to tell you," Detective Reed said quietly. "Where is Emma?" "She's having breakfast in the hospital cafeteria with a nurse," Elizabeth answered. "Have you found something?" Detective Reed nodded and motioned for her to sit down. "We've arrested Robert Fisher. He was working at a hospital in New Jersey but had apparently taken leave for the past few weeks. We've also found evidence that he hired someone involved in Caroline's accident." Anger and sadness spread through Elizabeth's chest. "Why would he?" She choked on her words. "When we searched his home, we found photos of your daughter, records of her activities, and various drugs," Detective Reed continued quietly. "It appears he was planning to kill Caroline deliberately. We also found drugs that were likely stolen from the hospital pharmacy." "But why?" Elizabeth asked in a trembling voice. "His plan was," Detective Reed explained, choosing her words carefully. "It seems he wanted to gain custody of Emma. If Caroline died, he would automatically be able to claim custody as Emma's father." Elizabeth covered her face with trembling hands. She couldn't believe that Robert, who had been married to Caroline and was in a position to save people as a doctor, had devised such a terrible plan. "Has he confessed?" Elizabeth asked. "Not yet. But the evidence is substantial," Detective Reed answered. "The man he hired has also been arrested and is telling us everything. The accident was planned." The door to the room opened, and Dr. Morris entered. "I have good news," he said quietly. "Caroline's condition is improving. The swelling in her brain is beginning to subside, and there's a high possibility she'll regain consciousness soon." Tears welled up in Elizabeth's eyes. "Thank you." That afternoon, as Elizabeth was reading with Emma in the hospital room, Caroline's fingers moved slightly. "Mom." Emma gripped her mother's hand tightly. "Grandma," Mom moved. Elizabeth quickly pressed the nurse call button. Dr. Morris and a nurse rushed in and examined Caroline. "She's regaining responsiveness," Dr. Morris said with a smile. "This is a good sign." Late that night, Caroline finally opened her eyes. At first, she was confused and unable to speak, but gradually she began to understand the situation. Elizabeth briefly explained to Caroline about the accident but didn't yet tell her about Robert's involvement to avoid hindering her recovery. A week later, Caroline's condition had dramatically improved. She could sit up for short periods and enjoy conversations with Emma. "Mom, thank you so much," Caroline said, holding Elizabeth's hand. "For taking care of Emma and me." "Of course," Elizabeth smiled. "But there's something I need to tell you." Elizabeth told Caroline the truth. That the accident had been planned, that Robert had tried to kill her, and that if it hadn't been for Emma's brave discovery, his plan might have succeeded. Caroline listened silently and finally cried. "I can't believe it, that he would go that far." "Robert will stand trial next week," Elizabeth said. "He'll likely spend a long time in prison." "What about Emma? Does she know what her father did?" Caroline asked worriedly. "I only told her that her father did something bad and was arrested," Elizabeth answered. "We'll tell her the details when she's a bit older." As Caroline's discharge date approached, Elizabeth began preparing her home. Caroline and Emma would be living with Elizabeth for the time being. She moved a new bed into the house and prepared the rooms. On the day of the trial, Elizabeth took the witness stand. She spoke calmly but emotionally. "If not for my granddaughter Emma's brave actions, my daughter would not be here today." Robert, sitting in the courtroom, showed no expression. There was no sign of regret in his eyes, only cold anger. "Defendant Robert Fisher," the judge said in a stern voice. "Your actions were premeditated and despicable. From your obsession with your ex-wife and your twisted desire for revenge, you attempted to take her life. Furthermore, the crime of trying to involve your young daughter is serious. Robert, believing himself to be justified until the end, showed an angry expression at the verdict. He received a sentence of 20 years in prison. After the trial, Caroline sat with Elizabeth in a quiet cafe. Emma had returned to school, and they finally had time to talk alone. "Mom," Caroline said quietly. "For a long time, I didn't realize Robert's true nature. To think he would try to hurt us." "It's not your fault," Elizabeth held her daughter's hand. "He abused his knowledge and position as a doctor. But he can never hurt us again." Caroline nodded and looked out the window. "Emma has become a strong child. I wonder if she'll grow up to be like her mother." "No," Elizabeth smiled. "She'll grow up to be like you. Brave, with a sense of justice, and full of love." Tears welled up in Caroline's eyes. "I'm going to start a new life. With Emma. We're in this together," Elizabeth said. "Now and always." A year later, in spring, Elizabeth's garden was filled with colorful flowers. Especially the young cherry tree planted in the center, swaying its pale pink petals in the wind. This was a special plant they named the Tree of Hope, which the three of them had planted together after Caroline's discharge. Elizabeth was drinking coffee while looking at the garden from the window. Today was the day of Emma's speech contest, and after Caroline had dropped her daughter off at school, they planned to go watch the contest together. Emma had prepared a speech on the theme of courage and love, which, without touching on the specific details of the incident, would talk about how important family bonds are even in difficult situations. The front door opened, and Caroline entered. She had a more composed expression than before, with a new determination in her eyes. "Mom, are you ready?" Caroline asked with a smile. Emma was really nervous. "But I'm sure she'll be fine." "Yes, I'm ready." Elizabeth stood up and kissed her daughter's cheek. After the incident, Caroline had shifted the focus of her legal activities towards supporting victims of domestic violence and child abuse. Her own experience had become a driving force to help those in similar situations. Elizabeth, too, had started a family support group in the community, spreading knowledge and techniques for older adults to protect their grandchildren and families. "Did you read the letter from Robert?" Elizabeth quietly asked. Caroline's expression darkened slightly. "Yes. He says he's reformed, but..." She looked out the window. "I can't believe it. But I don't want to think about him anymore. We have a new life." Robert had sent several letters from prison. At first, they contained content justifying his actions, but recently they had included words of apology and regret. However, no one could tell whether these were sincere or just an act aimed at early release. "Well, let's go." Elizabeth picked up her bag. "Emma is waiting." The school auditorium was bustling with parents and teachers. When Emma's turn came, she stood on the stage, looking a bit nervous. However, when she found her mother and grandmother sitting in the audience, her expression brightened. "The theme of my speech is courage and love," Emma began in a clear voice. "A year ago, my family faced a great trial. That's when I realized that true courage isn't about not being afraid, but about taking action for those you love, even when you are afraid." Caroline and Elizabeth listened with tears of pride and emotion in their eyes. They remembered the fear that the 7-year-old girl had experienced and yet how she had spoken up to save her mother despite that fear. When the speech ended, the auditorium was filled with warm applause. When it was announced that Emma had won, Caroline and Elizabeth stood up and cheered. On the way home, the three ate ice cream while walking through the park. The soft light of dusk enveloped them. "Mom, Grandma," Emma suddenly stopped and looked up at them. "We're the best family, aren't we?" Caroline embraced her daughter, and Elizabeth joined the circle. Their three shadows merged into one and stretched long. "Blood ties alone don't make a family," Caroline said quietly. "It's the courage and love to protect each other that create a true family." Elizabeth nodded and embraced her granddaughter and daughter. Many unseen seasons stretched out before them. And Elizabeth was confident that no matter what difficulties might come, this bond would support them.